Hey, thank you so much for joining us at our Crosspoint Church podcast. Now, if you're new to our podcast or maybe new to our church in general, we're just a bunch of messed up people who don't have it all together, running after a heavenly leader who loves us and meets us right where we are. We hope this message encourages you, builds your faith, and strengthens your confidence as you continue down this journey of what it means to know and follow Jesus. Enjoy this message.
All right. Hey, people, Easter's coming. Who's excited about Easter coming up in a couple weekends? Man, I tell you what, it's the one event that really changed everything when it comes to the Christian faith. And so a big weekend here, big weekend all around the world. And as we've said, it's going to be a busy weekend in our community with spring break. And so, we want you to be thinking ahead of how you're going to be engaging 3 different opportunities through the weekend. And not just how you can engage, but who you can invite and how you can serve. Lots of opportunities to do all that. And so we are excited for Easter. Hey, welcome to Crosspoint. My name's Curt, and we are excited you're here. If you're here for the first time, super excited you've joined us during this series, Starting Over, and it's a great time to be just kind of checking into Crosspoint and figuring out what this place is about and seeing if perhaps God has something he wants to communicate and speak to you as a result of our time together. And we want to say, give a big shout out to those online this week. Let's make some noise for those that's joining us in the online spaces. So excited to have you joining us. Now, today, we're going to dive into week 4 of Starting Over, and we've been talking about how to ensure that the next time is better than the last time. And so, if you are in need of a start over on anything, or maybe you're in the midst of a start over when it comes to a bad job situation or a bad marriage situation, or maybe something, in a relationship or a bad academic situation, and you're like, I just don't even know if I'm going to have any options academically. Let me just assure you, I get your pain. I totally do. In high school, I always wondered if I was going to have options. I mean, I was like on the verge of the academic ineligible list all the time. My goal was to just stay on the playing field and on the basketball court. That was really, the goal of my academics, and that is not something to aspire to. That's just me being honest. And yeah, I went to college and did really well, and then I have a real job. I didn't have to work at a church, but this has worked out pretty well. And so, so we're all good. And so if you're just in a place academically where you're like, I don't know if I'm going to have options, I totally get that. And perhaps it's a season where you're looking to say, okay, what's next? And so last week, we began to look at 3 things, 3 exercises, 3 processes, if you will, that we have to engage in to ensure that the next time is better than the last time. And these really help us evaluate our experience. And so last week, we said, number 1, we have to own it. Number 2, we have to rethink it. And number 3, we have to release it. And so again, just to make sure we're all tracking, everybody's awake, and we're all together on this, let's just say these out loud together, all right? So number 1, we're going to own it. Number 2, we're going to, and number 3, we're going to, yes, you guys are on it. All right, so last week we looked at what it means to own it and how you cannot blame your way to a better future. You can blame your way into the future. We've all done that before, but you can't blame your way into a better future. And one of the things we looked at is how blame actually sets you up for a repeat performance. And when you think about that, it's like, why would you want to do that? Why would you want to set yourself up for another financial disaster? Right? Why would you want to set you up for another marriage disaster? Why would you want to set yourself up for another career disaster, or whatever it may be for you? That's what blame does. And so, when we own our piece in the past, we say, okay, this was my part, and we looked at kind of the circle of blame and how much of that is me and how much of that was them. We all have a part in that. It actually is the step in us taking responsibility to own our piece so that we don't continue to carry that into our future. And so today we're going to move on to the next phase, and we're going to talk about what it means to rethink it. And here's what I mean when I say rethink it. Whatever that thing is that you are thinking about or in the midst of or needing to start over, whether it's relationally or academically or professionally or, financially, whatever realm it might be, at some point along the way, we ask ourselves this really, really important question. We say, what was I thinking? right? We've all said that at some point or another. What was I thinking? Everybody told me she wasn't right for me. It took me forever to get there, and now I look back and I'm like, what was I thinking? Like your friends were like, listen, she's not right, and they give you a list of reasons, right? And you're like, but I love her. And they're like, well, what do you love about her? And you couldn't answer that question, but you just stayed in it, right? So now you're like, okay, what was I thinking? Or perhaps it was like 0% down and I don't have to make payments for 8 years. Like you should have seen that one coming, right? And now you're like, what was I thinking? And so at some point along the way, we all get to this question, what was I thinking? And the amazing thing is, when we think about this question, even our own decisions sometimes really don't make sense to us. And that's what I really want us to talk about this weekend. Because I think we all intuitively ask this question. I think rhetorically we ask this question, what was I thinking? What was I thinking? Oh my gosh, well, she was so cute. Okay, I'm going to jump back in. Or, what was I thinking? Well, it looks so good on me, so I'm going to buy another one. I mean, we just naturally, we ask the question, but we don't really pause long enough to get to an answer. We don't spend the time that we need processing it so we actually answer this question. And I'm telling you, I mean, I can't emphasize this enough. Stopping to come up with an answer to this question right here. This is one of the keys to ensuring that the next time won't be like the last time. And here's why. Here's why this is so important. Because if you think the way you used to think, then ultimately you're going to end up doing what you used to do. And so if we think the way we used to think, if we don't pause and say, okay, what was I thinking? Okay, what actually led me to that? Then you're going to end up doing the same things that you've always done. So we're going to kind of dive into this today, and we're going to look at a couple things from the New Testament part of the Bible, a guy by the name of the Apostle Paul, and he highlights the importance of this. And if you're not really a Bible person, that's totally cool. I think we're glad you're here. In fact, I think you're going to listen to some of this stuff Paul says, and you're going to be like, wow, that is just common sense. And I can actually put that to work. And so at the end then of looking at what Paul says, we're going to look at 5 lethal thoughts, 5 lethal assumptions, if you will, that we generally operate out of. Things that we kind of believe that actually are undermining us ensuring the next time is better than the last time. And so these are kind of 5 ways of thinking. And again, they're just not accurate. But when you see them, you're just going to look at them and go, yeah, that doesn't make any sense at all. Like when I believe that, why would anybody think that? And so we'll unpack those a bit and try to understand how those are impacting the decisions that we make. But first, before we get to that, I want to take a look at what Paul writes in this book called Romans, which isn't really a book. It's actually a letter that he writes to Christians living in Rome. Now, we talk about Paul a lot around here, and part of that is because he wrote more than half of the New Testament. And so Paul is someone, though, that understood a bit the need to start over. So he was somebody who had a pretty big first time, and then he had a failure, and then he had an even bigger second time. And in his first time, he had a lot of shame and embarrassment. In fact, he was a highly religious individual, very, very religious, very, very, intense, holding everybody to, the highest religious standards, but it wasn't in the brand of Jesus. It was just all about religiosity. And so he in fact was so about it and so about following the rules. He was actually trying to get rid of the silly Christians in the world. He's like, these people following Jesus, they don't know what they're doing. This is ridiculous. And so he was actually arresting Christians. And so people in the first century, they remember this. They kind of know this. And he later on is embarrassed about this. But he was just very religious, but not of the brand of Jesus. And so you just have to ask yourself, when you see someone whose fruit and whose character coming out of their life is all about power and authority, but there's no love, there's no compassion, there's no empathy, there's no sense of how do I put myself aside and really put others in front of myself and honor others. You have to ask yourself, okay, they may be super religious, but is that coming from the type of love and character of Jesus? Because there's a certain brand of love and compassion and grace that comes out of those who are following Jesus. And so Paul understood this tension, and because he used to be that guy. And he has a lot to say on this, and so because he's kind of a product of what we're talking about today. So here's what he says to these Christians in Rome. He says, therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, which I want to pause right there, because the fact that he says brothers and sisters, this means that if you're not a Christian, this wasn't written for you. All right, this was written for people who are following Jesus. Now, that doesn't mean it doesn't apply, like you can't take learnings from it. Like you might go, oh, wow, this is really cool. I think I want to apply this. This is some good thinking. It just means you like have the option, right? But for those that are Christians, those of us that are following Jesus, he's like, all right, let me kind of explain to you how you grow in your awareness and following of God. He says, therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, meaning in light of God's enormous grace, mercy, goodness to us, he says, I want you to offer your bodies, not just your minds, not just your intentions, not like an hour on Thursday at the early weekend service or an hour online or, a couple hours on Sunday, more than that. He says, I want you to offer your entire bodies as and look at this phrase here at the end, a living sacrifice. Now, when they would hear this in the first century, of course, they wouldn't think metaphorically like you and I, oh gosh, I have to sacrifice, I have to get up so early to go to church or to, do something engaging with God. They didn't think about it that way. This was like literal sacrifice, like animal sacrifice on the altar, paying for my sins. I mean, it was very literal, physical, bloody, gory. And so he says, I want you to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. And so he's kind of saying, hey, don't get all up in thinking that God is just interested in you, killing an animal as a sacrifice. And God's like, okay, that's good. It's not about killing animals. He's like, I want you to offer yourself, all right, your day by day, moment by moment. I want you to consider your life. What does it look like for me to live in a way that's a living sacrifice? And I think he pauses here and he kind of looks at what he wrote and he's kind of like, all right, perhaps that's a bit heady. All right. I mean, I don't even know fully what that means. And he's the one that wrote it. So then he dives into details of what this looks like. And we get this like amazing insight into your and my thinking right here. So here's what he says next. He says, do not conform to the pattern of this world. Meaning there is a way, there is a pattern in this world. All right, he says, don't conform to that. All right, don't just follow the pattern of the world. Don't allow yourself to be conformed to the pattern of this world. If you conform to what everybody else in this world's doing, then you're going to have anxiety like everyone else. He says, don't do that. He says, if you conform, what everybody else is doing in the world, your marriage is going to look like everybody else's marriage. All right, it's going to be very selfish as opposed to selfless, mutual submission to one another. He says, hey, you don't want that. He says, you're going to be in debt like everyone else. You're going to be unhappy. I mean, you're going to be so focused on all the things you don't have as opposed to, gratitude and thankfulness for all that God has done. He says, don't do that. Don't fall into that pattern. In other words, don't just like let your feet be picked up and like the flow of what's happening, like sweep you away into the pattern of the way things work. All right. In other words, here's the other way you can think about this. He's kind of saying, listen, don't be this guy right here, right? Don't like be the cookie cutter. Don't like conform to a pattern where it's just like, all right, next, where every time you turn around, you're just looking like everyone else. He's like, don't do that. Don't be this guy right here because, the eyes might look different, the hair might look different, but your life, everything about you is looking like everyone else. He's like, don't be this guy. All right? This is what Paul's saying. He's like, hey, if you're somebody who's following me, who's running after my heart, don't look this way. All right? Don't conform to what's going on around you. You know how much intentionality it takes to conform to what's going on around you? 0. That's how much intentionality it takes. 0. 0 intentionality, 0 effort, 0 discipline. He says, don't do this. Don't be this guy. We're going to set this little guy right here. How about that? Is that good? I'll set him right there just so you can watch him. And then he gives us a bit of contrast on this. He says, don't conform to the pattern of this world. And then he goes on to say, but be transformed. He says, I want you to lean in. He said, I want you to give some effort. I want you to make a decision to not be conformed, but to be transformed. Now, another way of thinking about this is basically, he's like, hey, don't be this guy right here. He's like, I want you to be this guy right here. I want you to be Optimus Prime. That's what I want you to be. I want you to, be this guy. Because let's be honest. You look at these two and you're like, do I want to be this little guy right here? Do I want to just be like everybody else in the world? Or do I want to be like this guy? I want to be conformed. I want to be transformed, right? Like, well, let's be honest. We want to be transformed. It's like, don't just be stamped out. Don't just like go along with the way things work. He's like, no, I want you to be different. Be transformed. And let's be honest, when you look at these two images, you're like, yeah, I want to be a transformer, right? I don't want to live like everybody else. I don't want a marriage like everybody else. I don't have anxiety and fear and walk around, with this sense of just unhappiness like everybody else. I don't want that. Yes, I want to be transformed. The Apostle Paul knew this. This is why this is what he says next is absolutely amazing. He says, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. He says the renewing of your mind. Yes, I want you to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, all right? But in order for your body to do what living sacrifices do, there's got to be some changes right here, all right? You got to pay attention to what's going on right here. And you have to pause long enough to ask that question that, we've kind of posed. What was I thinking? We have to understand, okay, what's going on right here? Because you're transformed not by simply, applying your will and saying, well, I'm just going to engage the will and do what I want. He says, no, you're transformed by the renewing of your mind. So basically, he says to renew means to restore. He says, do you want to be this guy or do you want to be this guy? You want to be the transformer. And it takes more than discipline, more than willpower. That might be a part of it, but he says you got to change the way that you think because transformation is a result of renewed thinking. Now, as we think about this, I want to make it real practical here. How many of you, just out of show of hands, how many of you ever restored something? Piece of furniture, car, a house? Yeah, a few, yeah, awesome. If you've restored something, you realize how hard a work that is. A few years, I've restored a number of things, desks, piece of furniture, part of a home. A few years ago, my son and I, we bought a couple snowmobiles, actually one, and they threw the second one in because it didn't work. And I grew up with snowmobiles, and I'm grieving our lack of winter, so I'm going to tell you this story, just maybe to, appease myself. But we bought these snowmobiles, and they were in need of restoring. I mean, one was barely working, the other one wasn't working. And, this is what they looked like when we got them. And to renew or restore, you have to strip off the old and then put on the new. And when you take the old off, it's a process. It's hard and tedious, and it's a lot of work and a lot of elbow grease, and it takes time. But I'll tell you where the fun comes in. The fun comes in. So we restored I started with like the engines and tore down the carburetors and then rebuild them. And the joy comes when you have moments like this right here. This is the very first startup right here. Come on, is that not like get you? Like the guys in the room are like, yes. The ladies are like, I don't know why that's so exciting. That moment when that thing fired up for the first time, that was like, all right, we're having fun now. But the work had just begun. And so, when you begin to restore something, you begin to strip it down. You begin to take it apart. You begin to take things off, and it's hard work, and you have to take off the old. And honestly, when you're doing that, nobody walks up and says, wow, that looks fantastic. In fact, here's what these machines looked like actually when I got them broken down. My family came out, and they're like, wow, they look worse than when you started. And that's usually what happens when you're restoring something. And so, it was kind of like, why are you doing this? Why are you spending so much time on this? Well, there's a process. And it's not just that, you want something, but you're like, I want to put something into this and actually transform it and take it somewhere, which is kind of the work that God does in us. But a lot of times you have to take off, it starts by taking off the old before you can put on the new. And then, eventually you get to a place where the payoff begins to come. And so here's actually what these machines look like. There's my son a number of years ago when we started this project. And you're like, oh my gosh, those are like some beautiful vintage sleds, right? And then the bigger payoff is when you get to do things like this right here. Like this was pretty amazing. Until my wife saw it in our photo feed, and she's like, what are you doing? Why are we jumping these things off hills? But, she doesn't need to know what happens in those moments, except when she rides. But these are the payoffs right here, right? But the process is taking off the old before you begin to put on the new. And let me ask you something. Have you ever restored something? If you've ever painted something that's old, where perhaps the paint was peeling, and you just decided to paint over it before scraping or sanding, what happens if you apply the new before scraping off and taking off the old? Yeah, it peels right off, right? It doesn't stick. I don't know when it comes to religious experiences what that looks like for you. I know we have varied religious experiences and church experiences, and for me, over the years, churches all around the world, I've experienced different things, and sometimes we get criticized for this here at Crosspoint, meaning, there historically has been kind of this short sale approach to Christianity where, we just create this big emotional moment and have an altar call. We don't do altar calls here at Crosspoint. I grew up in churches that did that, and it's like, we're going to bring you all down here, and we're going to have you pray this prayer, and, just come forward and rededicate your life, and you just say these words, and everything is going to change. And, because if you pray the magic prayer, it just goes that way. And one of the things I discovered is, and you probably know this too. In fact, it might be why you're at Crosspoint, because you realize, you're smart people, and you're like, okay, life just doesn't go that way. We know that that's just not exactly how life works. Right? I grew up in church where, I'd done all that. And, I remember, I don't even know how many times I went down to the altar. I don't know how many times I ended up down praying at the end of a service. It's like, God, I messed up again. And then I prayed. I'm like, apparently it didn't stick last time. I must not have been dedicated enough. And I'm back down again. And, and some of you chuckle a little bit perhaps because you've had the same experience. But it's like, okay, God, next time I'm really going to dedicate myself. Apparently I wasn't as dedicated as I need to be. I'm really doing it this time. And I'm just going to dedicate my way to a better future. And the Apostle Paul kind of is like, you're not transformed by the dedication of your life, all right? You're not transformed by the rededication of the last dedication or the rededication of the dedication that you did before the last dedication. Like that's not how you're transformed. He says, no, you're transformed by the renewing of your mind. All right? And so the question, again, we're back to the question of, what happens when you put on the new before taking off the old? The new peels right off. Which is why, for some of us, as we think even about our spiritual lives, we've promised God in my next relationship, and God the next time around in marriage, and the next semester, the next job, I'm really gonna try harder. I'm gonna dedicate myself a little more. I'm going to, and the new just peels right off. And part of it's because we've never asked the question, what was I thinking? What was I thinking? What's going on right here? Now, here's why we don't generally spend time on this. And this is the same as if we're renewing furniture, if we're renewing a car or a house. The reason we don't take on projects like this, we don't like to spend time on this, is because renewal takes time. Renewal takes time. And as we said a couple weeks ago, time is your friend. Renewing your mind, it takes time. You don't just take off the old and immediately everything's great. It takes time to take off the old, and if we just apply the new, it just peels right off. And see, this is why the Apostle Paul says, if you want to be transformed, it's not just a matter of will or better discipline. That might be a part of it, but you have to renew your mind, and time is your friend. And this is why, people that, if you're single again, when somebody comes to me and they're like, well, how long should I wait before I start dating again? And I'll usually just say, hey, I would suggest a year. You don't have to do anything I say. Maybe if you're looking for some advice just on my experience, I'd suggest a year. All right? Because if you just slap a new commitment on, before you've kind of peeled off some of the old, you need to ask this question, okay, what was I thinking? What was going on? Because perhaps, you've never answered that question. And again, it takes some time to answer that question. And for the serial daters out there, and I'm not talking like you have breakfast together with your date. I'm talking serial as in you just keep dating, like it's ongoing, right? You're like, whoa, okay. Perhaps you just need to take a moment because you're like, I just don't know what's wrong with all the people I'm dating. And it's like, well, maybe you need to pause for a moment. And you're like, well, what if I do that and I miss the right person? And see, here's the thing there. You may not be ready for them to like you yet. all right? You might not be the right person that they're going to see and go, oh my God, this is somebody who I really want to spend time with, because maybe there's some work to do, all right? Maybe you need to ask the question, okay, what was I thinking? What do I need to do? Because, you might run into them and it's just not, like, you're not in a good place for that yet, and you're going to apply the new and it's just going to peel off. This is why anybody who goes through any kind of big life transition, of any kind, that I usually just recommend, like, take some time. Don't just jump into another big investment or a new job, or, you need a little bit of time. You need to hit the pause button because you've been in the emergency room emotionally. And so don't make any big decisions. You got to peel back the old a bit before you apply the new. It's going to take some time. And here's the thing. Here's why this is so hard. And, for all of us here in the room and those of us, watching online, the reason we kind of know this is true is our problem, your problem, my problem is we know it's true. We just think it's true for the person next to us, right? Like, it's not true for me. My situation is different. And Paul's like, no. You can't just apply the will. Sincerity and commitment aren't enough, right? I mean, we should have learned this from, like, our exercising routine we committed to in January. You're like, I am so committed this year. I'm so sincere. I'm going to do it this year. I'm really going to pull this off, and then 7 days later, you're sleeping in every morning. Okay, we should take some cues and realize, okay, just applying our will is not enough. And so the Apostle Paul, he kind of nails it for us right here. He says, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. He says, then you're going to be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good and his pleasing and his perfect will. Now, let me ask you a question. Do you want to know? You don't have to answer this out loud, but do you want to know what God's will is? And some of you are like, yes, I want to know what that is. I wish God would show me what it is. Paul says, okay, you got to take some time and you need to renew your mind. And some of us go, well, I thought if I just prayed long enough, maybe God would speak to me. I'd actually hear God speak and he'd tell me what his will is. Listen, you don't want that to happen. Let me just tell you. You don't want God to speak audibly to you. All right? Sometimes people are like, hey, I just want to hear God's voice. Let me tell you, I don't really think you do. Especially at night if you're praying and you're all alone, I don't think you want to hear God's voice. It will freak you out and you will wet your drawers, just so you know. All right? Like, sometimes you're like, I want to hear from God. I don't know that we really do. And historically, throughout the scripture and the Old Testament, New Testament, whenever God speaks out loud, usually bad things are coming after that. So trust me, I don't know that you want to just like hear God say something out loud, but we do want to know what God's will is. And we want to know what it means to discern and be able to sort it out and get clarification. And he says, in order to do that, you need time to be transformed, and it happens through the renewing of your mind. This is why the fact that you're here this weekend, the fact that you're tuning in online, is such a big deal, because you're actually setting time aside to run after God and be challenged and maybe be submitted to some things that are going to push you and grow you, and for you to consider, beyond your current awareness to go, okay, what is God doing and what is God saying to me? This is part of how we grow forward and we renew our mind. This is why it's such a big deal, when you jump into a small group. When you connect with a small group of men or women, or just, in community with others. In fact, in my men's group, one of my men's groups this week, one of the guys came in and just talked about really some cool changes that he's been experiencing in his life. And man, all the guys around the table are like, this is so encouraging. Like, it just lit up our day to hear the hope that you have right now. This is what happens. This is where our hearts and our minds get renewed when we live in community and we see what God's doing in others, and we see that God could do the same in me. But he says you got to renew your mind. Regret and resolve is not enough, because if you think the way you used to think, you're going to do the things you used to do. So here's what we're going to do for the last couple minutes. I want to unpack these 5 lethal assumptions. I want us to kind of look at these. These are things that we believe, that we didn't even know we believed. These are things that, you might go, okay, one of these might be a speed bump for you. Maybe 3 or 4 of them are like speed bumps for you. But I want to surface a few of these, because these are things that just show up in our operating system, and they start churning out behavior, and we end up going, what was I thinking? All right, how did I get here? What's going on? So I want to help us discover what we're thinking. All right, you guys ready? You guys ready to look at these? All right, here we go. 5 lethal assumptions real quick. The first one is this: if I find the right person, everything will be all right. Okay, that is so not true, all right? We think if I find the right person, okay, everything's gonna be all right. Actually, it goes this way. When you become the right person, everything will be all right. All right, because we go, well, I mean, the last relationship didn't work, and the one before that didn't work, and the reason is because he was an idiot. I just need to find a non-idiot. That's what I need to do. To which I would say to you, why are you dating idiots anyway? Like, why in the world are you doing that, right? Like, okay, what were you thinking? You'd ask that question. What was I thinking? All right, you're just setting yourself up to date another idiot. No, it's becoming the right person. Becoming the right person is the goal, all right? Not finding the right person. If you become the right person the other person is looking for, I'm not talking about conforming to who they want you to be. I'm talking about being the kind of person that's dressed in love and grace and selflessness and goodness and empathy and compassion. When you become the right person other people are looking for, and they go, wow, that's the kind of person I want in my life, I guarantee you, you're going to be set up to have a better shot at finding them. All right? And because right now you might not be the kind of person they're going to like. All right, so we have to say, okay, what does it mean for me to become the person that the other person is looking for? All right, just trust me on that. All right, let that sit for a moment. All right, it actually makes sense. Second one, my situation is unique. I hate to tell you, but no, it is not. It is not. All right, this is why we have counselors, by the way. This is why we have therapists. In fact, here's a different way I could help us understand this. Why is it that when you go to a doctor that they almost always can diagnose your problems? You ever wonder that? Well, it's because nearly all of our bodies operate the same way. All right, and again, we're not going to like this, but your situation is not unique. You're unique, all right? You're unique, but your situation is not unique. And here's where this assumption gets really, really, really dangerous. See, we believe this, and this assumption is how we dodge wise counsel. You know, this assumption is how we do things that we kind of know, okay, I know that's really not the right thing, but hey, my situation's unique, I'm different than everyone else, and we use that to justify why we do some of the things we do. All right, so your situation's not unique. You are, but your situation isn't. Third one, if I only had blank, then I would be satisfied. How many times have we thought this? Let me ask you this question. Do you know anyone who has just one tattoo? Just one. All right, and you might say, well, I do. Well, perhaps for now, right? I mean, because if you have a tattoo, you probably remember the day where you thought, well, if I could just get a tattoo, and now you want a second one, right? And you may even have a second one, you just haven't told anybody about it, right? And so, you know, and listen, I'm all for tattoos. I'm not against tattoos. I love tattoos on other people's bodies. That's where I like tattoos, because I've had a lot of, you know, like needles in my body, and I'm not quite there yet. Maybe I will be one day. But I think they're fascinating. Here's the thing. Appetites are never fully and finally satisfied. You know, whenever we think, okay, you fill in the blank, if I could get this, then I will be satisfied. It's actually a lie. It's a lie. So again, you know, go ahead and lease it, purchase it, buy it, rent it, date it. I mean, you know, don't not do those things. It's just don't lie to yourself and say, okay, if I get this, then I'm going to be satisfied, because that's actually not true. We need to say, okay, what was I thinking? All right, what was I thinking? Well, what you're thinking is if I own it, or if I wear it, or if I drive it, or if I buy it, or if I date it, you know, then actually this is going to solve everything. All right, and so again, that's just a lie that we have to remember. All right, here's the fourth one. My secret is safe with me. No, it's not. It is not. Secrets are not safe. In fact, secrets are actually not good. Secrets are bad, and secrets are unhealthy. And so again, if you're single, or if you're single again, if you're a student, man, students, if you can get this, students, high school students, college students, I tell you, this will set you up for so much better success in life right here. When you take a secret into a relationship, all right, it does not remain a secret. It just breaks hearts. That's what secrets do. All right, when you take a secret into a relationship, it does not remain a secret, because secrets seep. That's what secrets do. Secrets are not safe. Secrets seep. And they seep into our most significant relationships, meaning you and your spouse and your alcohol addiction, you and your spouse and your opioid addiction. All right, that is not a good threesome. At some point, someone's going to have to leave. All right, you and your spouse and your porn addiction, you and your spouse and your sports betting addiction. I mean, again, that's not a good threesome. At some point, that, you know, someone's going to have to leave, and because secrets aren't safe, they actually seep, and so it's a lie. But then just for fun, here's the last one. Sex will solve it. Sex will solve it. All right? And we know that's not true. And yet as adults, and again, students, high school, junior high school students, college students, one of the things we understand is sex actually usually complicates it. Now here's the thing. You never say that right there. You never say, well, sex will solve it. Sex will solve it. We never actually say that out loud. What we actually say, it's the minute we go, if I could just get her to, or if I could get him to, or if we could just try, or if I could just get him to sleep with, or I could, we somehow think in the back of our mind that somehow sex is a problem solver. And man, if we could just imagine for a moment, just a moment, how much less pain and suffering and heartache and regret and loneliness and brokenness there might be in the world and in our lives, even just in our country, if, let's just say for 6 months, I mean, not forever, that would take a lot of self-control, for 6 months, we just decided to take what Jesus said and what the Apostle Paul said about sex and its implications seriously. I mean, would we have more joy or less joy? Would life be more complicated or less complicated? Now listen, God's not like some sexual killjoy. He created sex. It's an amazing thing. Sex is amazing. In fact, here's kind of how I think it played out. I think one day he was just up in the heavenlies and he's like, man, I have got a great idea. And the angels are like, what is it? And he's like, I don't think you're going to understand it. But it's my best idea yet. See, sex is amazing. Sex doesn't solve anything. And the minute we begin making relational decisions based on it, we go, okay, what was I thinking? Well, we were thinking without thinking that somehow this was going to solve it. So the question that we have to ask to kind of enable the next time to be better is, what was I thinking? As we think about, okay, what are some of the lies I've done that perhaps I operate out of? What are some of the things that the assumptions I need to identify? In those moments, I say, okay, what was I thinking? And as you answer this question, I'm telling you, it's going to set you up for a better next time. But I would encourage you not to start anything new until you get to the bottom of this question in whatever realm you perhaps might be starting over in. Because until you've taken off the old and began to understand, okay, what was I thinking, and begin to put on the new, you're never going to get to where you want to be. And it's not commitment, it's not resolve, it's not like, oh, if I just am more dedicated. It's actually the renewing of our minds. This is what sets us up for a better next time. So that's our homework this week. All right, if you look at your connection card that we filled out earlier, on the back side, let's tune in online in your form. This is one of our next steps this week. I'll spend a little time reflecting on this question. What was I thinking? What was I thinking? All right, and I'm telling you, this will help us make the next time be better. All right, I want to pray for us. Let's go ahead and stand, and we're going to sing one more song. We pray for us before we do that. Heavenly Father, thank you for this time. Thank you that we can dive into relevant things and things that matter, not just things that are, lofty ideas, but things that actually meet us where we are. And we've probably unpacked a few things this weekend that maybe landed a little difficult, or perhaps stirred up some things that have kind of caused us to have to sit and pause for a moment. God, I pray that you just help us to pause this week. Help us to do something different, to not just conform to what everybody else is doing, but to actually do something different. We have an opportunity to do something brand new this week, which is pausing, reflecting, asking the question, what was I thinking? Understanding, inviting you to renew our minds, and trusting that you can actually create something pretty amazing and beautiful, even out of the places where we're starting over, because that is where you do your best work. And we know the road's not easy. We know there's often a lot of bumps, and sometimes the mountain seems steep, God. But God, we know that this is the work that you do in us. So we just want to invite your Spirit to do its work in us. And we want to thank you for the work ahead of time along the way. And we pray these things according to your name and your character, Jesus.
Thanks so much for joining us today. Take a moment to follow our podcast on your preferred platform, and be sure to download our app to stay informed on everything happening here at Crosspoint. And if you like what you heard today, don't hesitate to share it with a friend that might need to hear it too.